At a company-wide workshop, my ex-boss stood on stage and said, "Let's talk about what happens when you promote the wrong person too fast." Then he made a joke about emotional overthinkers who crack under pressure. I was sitting in the front row, wearing a badge from a better company as a guest speaker, and when I got on stage after him, my first slide read, I was 24 when I got hired at that company, fresh out of grad school, full of hope, too eager for my own good. I didn't come for money. My parents worked factory jobs. I was the first in my family to ever work in an office, let alone get promoted within the first 2 years. So I thought I had something special, that I was doing something right. The company was mid-sized, well-known in our region. Tech consulting. Fast-paced, long hours, but a decent culture, or so I thought. My first year, I kept my head down and just did the work. I didn't speak up much in meetings. I didn't go out for drinks after hours. I wasn't political. I didn't know you had to be. I thought results mattered more than anything. I was wrong. My boss, Mark, was one of those guys who always acted like he was mentoring you, but really he was just monitoring you, watching for weakness. He had this way of giving compliments that always came with a hook, like, "You've got a lot of potential if you can control that overthinking," or "Your ideas are good, but you still come across a little too emotional." I used to nod along like he was helping me grow. Now, I know he was grooming me, not for success, but to take the fall when he needed a scapegoat. It started small. He'd forget to include me on important emails. He'd rewrite my reports, but still keep my name on them, just in case they bombed. He once told me not to speak up at a client meeting because I got too passionate and it might be off-putting. I told myself it was feedback. I took it seriously. I wanted to be better. After about 18 months, I was promoted to lead a team of 6 analysts. Our team handled client onboarding and digital transformation projects. We were outperforming other teams in both client satisfaction and delivery time. I was proud. I thought Mark would be proud too. But instead, the more we succeeded, the more tense things got between us. He stopped calling on me in meetings. He stopped asking for my input altogether. Sometimes he'd outright contradict me in front of the team. Once, I raised a red flag about a system we were rolling out. I told him it needed 2 more weeks of testing or it would cause data sync errors. He waved me off and pushed the launch through anyway. Sure enough, it broke. And guess who got blamed? "Your team should have caught this," he said in front of everyone. I felt the air get sucked out of the room. Then came the big presentation. It was a pitch for one of our highest-paying clients, one that could bring in over $1 million in long-term business. I was asked to lead the proposal. I worked on it for 2 weeks straight. I stayed late every night, revised every slide, ran through it over and over again. 2 days before, Mark told me he'd be co-presenting. I felt weird about it, but I didn't argue. I thought maybe he was just trying to show support. Day of the pitch, we're in the boardroom, client execs across from us. I'm presenting slide 6 when he suddenly cuts in, flips to slide 10, and says, "Actually, let me jump in here. There's a mistake we need to clarify." He points to a figure, one that had already been corrected, and says it's unacceptable and that we'll look into how this happened. Then he smiles at the client and says, "We're still working on training some of our younger leads." I sat there frozen. I didn't speak the rest of the meeting. Afterward, he pulled me aside and said, "You weren't ready. I thought you could handle this, but clearly pressure gets to you." I didn't know what to say. 2 weeks later, I was called into HR. They said the company was restructuring and my role was being dissolved. No warning. No notice. I had to hand over my badge and leave the same day. Mark didn't come to say goodbye. He didn't even send an email. That was the lowest point of my life. I had never felt so humiliated, so disposable. I kept thinking about everything I could have done differently. Maybe if I'd just said less. Maybe if I hadn't raised that flag. Maybe if I hadn't tried so hard. I fell into a depression. I moved back into my parents' house for a while because I couldn't afford rent. I didn't touch my resume for months. I couldn't even look at LinkedIn without feeling sick. I felt like I had been exposed, like everyone could see I had failed. But eventually I started freelancing. At first just to pay bills, but slowly I started getting more work. Then a small firm hired me full time. The culture was different, kinder, more collaborative. My ideas were welcomed. My confidence came back in pieces. Year by year, I climbed back up, not just to where I had been, but far beyond it. Within 4 years, I was head of strategy. We'd won 2 national awards. I was featured in a trade magazine. Then I got invited to speak at a leadership workshop for a national business conference. I was shocked to see the host company. It was my old company. At first, I laughed. Then I almost declined. I thought, what's the point of digging that up again? But then something in me, maybe pride, maybe pain, said go. When I walked into the same auditorium, my chest tightened. The chairs were the same, the lobby vending machine still broken. I remembered the floor pattern, the smell of the hallway. I saw a few familiar faces, older now, but still recognizable. And then I saw Mark. He looked exactly the same. Tan suit, blue tie. He still walked like he owned the place. I tried to stay cool. I wasn't even sure he'd remember me. But then he walked on stage to warm up the crowd, talking about leadership, growth, mentorship, the usual stuff. Then he paused and smirked. He said, "Let's talk about what happens when you promote the wrong person too fast." Some people laughed. I froze. He looked straight at me. Then he added, especially emotional overthinkers, the ones who crack under pressure. I don't know how I stayed calm. I really don't. I was sitting in the front row, wearing my badge for my better company with guest speaker in bold under my name. When he walked past me after his talk, he stopped. Just a second. He looked at my badge, then at my face. I smiled. My name was on the schedule right after his. When I stepped up to the podium, I could feel his eyes on me. The room was packed. I clicked to my first slide. It read, "Let's talk about what happens when you promote the right person and then lose them." The room went silent. I took a breath. And I began. I started my talk calm, measured. I didn't rush. I wanted them to feel every word. I talked about what real leadership looks like, how true mentorship isn't about controlling people, it's about growing them. I told a story about a team that was thriving until leadership became about ego, not support. I didn't use names. I didn't need to. People started shifting in their seats. About 10 minutes in, I saw one of the senior VPs whispering to someone in the second row. I recognized her. She'd been in my final HR meeting before I got let go. She was looking right at me now. Not with anger, not even guilt. Just interest, like she was realizing something. Mark, on the other hand, was stiff, staring at the floor. He wouldn't look up. I wasn't sure if he was angry, embarrassed, or both. But I didn't stop. I had waited too long for this moment. I talked about the mistake of silencing emotional voices, how companies lose talent by ignoring the warning signs right in front of them. I even quoted something Mark used to say, one of his favorite lines, "Pressure reveals who's meant to lead." I let that sit. Then I said, "Some of us were under pressure. And we led anyway, even after you took everything." That line got an audible reaction. Not gasps, just movement. Like the whole room leaned in. After my talk, I stepped off stage. People clapped. Not a polite clap. A real one. I shook hands. A few younger employees came up to me and asked for advice. One woman said, "I think I know exactly who you were talking about." I didn't confirm anything, just smiled. Later, during the lunch break, I went to grab coffee, and Mark was already at the station. He turned, saw me, and froze. I didn't plan to say anything, but he did. He said, "That was a clever speech." I just nodded. Then he said, "You still take things too personally." I could have walked away, but instead I said, "No, you made it personal. I just remembered it." He didn't reply. That should have been it. But it got worse. 3 days later, I started getting LinkedIn messages, anonymous burner accounts. One said, "You're not as good as you think." Another said, "Careful who you call out." I blocked them, but the tone was familiar. Then a colleague forwarded me a thread from an industry forum, someone claiming I'd lied in my speech. that I'd smeared a former company and fabricated abuse for clout. They didn't name me directly, but the details matched my story. The thread was made by someone named R_Menor. His old email handle used to be R. Marcus Mender. I screenshotted everything. I didn't reply online. I didn't defend myself in public. But I started talking to a friend in legal, just in case. Then something strange happened. A woman I didn't know messaged me, said she'd worked under Mark too, said he'd done something similar to her, praised her, used her work, then blamed her when his numbers tanked. She quit quietly, no one ever knew. Within a week, I had 3 more messages from ex-employees. Same stories, different years, different roles, same pattern. I started collecting them. Dates, emails, screenshots, quiet stories that never got told because people left, moved on, buried it. And then came the email from the event organizer. They thanked me again for the talk, said it sparked conversations, and that a few internal leaders have asked for a recording of your session. I knew that meant one thing. They were starting to ask questions. A week after the event, I got a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Jenna, one of the only people at my old company who had treated me like a human being. She was an admin back then, smart and kind, always keeping her head low to avoid drama. We were never close, but we got along. She sounded nervous on the phone. She said, "You didn't hear this from me." Then she told me the internal chatter had exploded after the workshop. My talk had been shared across 3 departments. Apparently, someone from legal even asked to review it. A few managers guessed exactly who I was referring to in the speech. Mark, in response, was panicking. He'd called a closed-door meeting and was insisting I was lying. Said I was still bitter and trying to tear down the company. Then she told me something I didn't expect. There's a complaint, an official one, about him, from someone still here. My chest tightened. That changed everything. I had been telling my story for myself, not to bring him down, just to reclaim something I lost. But now I realized maybe I wasn't the only one still carrying the damage. 3 days later, I got another message, this time from someone named David. He said he was Mark's current direct report, and he was ready to talk. We met in person. He brought a folder. Inside were printouts of emails, redlined documents, meeting summaries. Mark had been pulling the same tricks for years, sabotaging rising employees, then writing them up for being disorganized or too reactive. One email had my name in it, from back when I was still there. Mark had forwarded a file of mine with the note, "Keep an eye on her. Think she might crack under pressure. Not leadership material." It was dated 3 weeks before my final HR meeting. David looked at me and said, "I think he's done this to at least 6 people." That hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't even angry. I just felt cold. I sent everything to my lawyer friend. He didn't say much at first, just looked at the folder and said, "This is going to unravel fast." And it did. The VP who'd whispered in the audience, she reached out privately through a mutual contact. She asked if I'd be willing to do a closed-door interview with their compliance team. By the time that happened, I had a dozen stories, real names, dates, emails. I didn't embellish anything. I just told the truth. One of the HR reps sitting in that interview was the same person who let me go years ago. She looked pale when I brought up the phrase emotional overthinker. She said nothing, just wrote things down. The twist I never saw coming came 2 weeks later. Someone leaked the internal report. It wasn't me, I swear. But someone inside sent it to a journalist who covers toxic corporate culture and leadership abuse. And when the story went live, it blew up. No names at first, just a senior director at a national consulting firm and a pattern of internal manipulation spanning multiple years. But people inside knew. And people outside figured it out fast. LinkedIn threads, quiet rumors, even recruiters whispering it in DMs. Mark's name started popping up. Then came the wildest twist of all. I got an email from the CEO of that company. Just a short note. "Would you be willing to return as a consultant to help us restructure our leadership pipeline?" I stared at the screen for a long time. I hadn't said yes. Not yet, but I was thinking about it. I didn't answer the CEO right away. I sat with it for a few days. I didn't know if I was ready to walk back into the same building that once pushed me out like trash. I didn't know if it would bring me peace or just rip everything open again. But I thought about the others, the people who had messaged me, the ones who never got to speak up, the ones who were still there, still quiet, still scared. So I said yes. We signed a short-term contract. I came in twice a week. They made me a neutral party on the internal review board for leadership restructuring. I asked for full access to past performance data, employee surveys, and exit interviews. At first, people were careful around me, but not cold. More like curious. Some remembered me. Some were surprised. Some just watched. And Mark? He avoided me for the first few weeks. I'd see him in the halls, turning the other way. He knew. The tension was heavy. But it didn't last. Because 2 months in, HR placed him on leave. He came into the building that morning, and by lunch he was gone. They called it a neutral separation, but everyone knew. The report had been finalized, the findings were clear. 5 formal complaints. 3 with supporting documentation. Multiple patterns of retaliation, manipulation, and psychological targeting. And the kicker? One of the VPs revealed that Mark had blocked over a dozen internal promotions over 5 years. Usually women, usually younger employees, usually anyone he felt threatened by. They didn't fire him on paper. They gave him a consulting exit, probably so he wouldn't sue. But his name was done in the industry. Word got out. The journalist followed up with a second piece, this time naming names. I didn't give a quote. I didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves. A month later, I was asked to lead a workshop, not as revenge, just as closure. I stood on the same stage I once walked off in shame, same microphone, same room. This time, the crowd wasn't fake clapping or whispering. They listened. I ended my talk with one sentence. When you silence someone long enough, they remember how to speak louder. The room stayed quiet after that. It wasn't applause that mattered anymore. It was knowing I'd said what needed to be said in the exact place where it was once taken from me. As for me, I finished my contract. I didn't stay. I didn't want a full-time job there. I left on my own terms this time. No write-up. No fake restructuring. No guilt. Before I left, I got a thank you letter signed by the board, and one of the VPs pulled me aside and said, "You gave people courage to say what they've been holding in for years." That mattered more than anything. Mark tried to start a consulting business after all of this, but no one hired him. His LinkedIn went quiet. Someone told me he moved cities. I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled. Years ago, I sat at my desk, shaking, thinking I had lost everything. This time, I walked out of that same building, head high, keys in hand, and drove away. No tears, no speeches, just peace. And that was enough.